Imagine you're going to a hotel for a convention center and, you're with your friend and you guys get your stuff into your hotel room and you guys are kind of chilling for a bit. You're in Chicago and you look out the window. It's kind of getting dark out, but not too dark. And you're like, you know what? Why don't we go and grab something to eat and kind of like just go around Chicago? So you open the door and you head out, but by the time you go through one of the doors, you find yourselves walking through like this corridor and it's kind of weird. It's not that weird, but because it's kind of an older hotel, but it's kind of long and kind of like disorientates you and you're like, that's weird. But then you find yourself somehow making a circle and you see your hotel room and you're like, what the heck? I thought we were leaving. You were able to get in this hotel. So, like, that's kind of weird. You're like, okay, maybe you weren't paying attention. Maybe you guys were like, oh my God, not us getting lost. You finally go out one of the doors and you find stairs. You're like, oh, finally, how did we miss this? So you go down the stairs, but by the time you get to the very bottom, it's a dead end. There's just a wall there. And you're like, okay, that's kind of weird. It's an older hotel. So maybe they just haven't finished this area, or maybe they put up a wall. Who knows? So you go back up the stairs, you open another door, and you find yourselves going in circles and you're a little bit confused. Now you're pretty hungry and annoyed and angry. You're very hangry. You're like, what the heck is going on? You're kind of anxious though, because you're like, this is weird. You got into the hotel, you got into the room. There's no way you can't get out. You finally find yourself finding another door. You open it and it's just a brick wall. Okay, this is weird. Is this a prank? Are you on like a TV show? Is this like, what would you do? Like, what would you do if you're trapped? You're kind of confused. You're like, am I in a haunted house? Like, this is weird. You can't really seem to find your way out and you don't really hear anyone, but you're just like, okay, this is kind of weird. But that's when you guys finally find another door. You open it and you fall. It's a trap door. You fall into a room. It's just like a box. It's just four walls around you. There's not a single door. There's not any windows. And you try to call for help. You and your friend are like freaking out. You're calling, but no one's coming for you. You have just fallen into a trap of the H H Holmes murder castle. A murder castle designed by America's first known serial killer. You're most likely going to starve here, or you might be gassed until he comes for you and he takes you down to a basement where he'll most likely torture you, dissect you, and then sell your bones to a medical school. You're probably one out of his 200 victims. And this is the case of the first serial killer recorded in America, H H Holmes and his murder castle. Hi, welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm your host, Jen. With me is Kira. This podcast, we talk about all sorts of things that are interesting, disturbing, true crime. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about H H Holmes and his murder castle. So before we begin, I want to give a few content warnings. We will be talking about obviously multiple murders, torture, and kind of a little bit of body gore in a way. So if any of that is a little bit too much for you, want to click out, you can check out another episode or click out and take care of yourself. And we'll see you in the next episode. So all of our information is found online and through books, articles. I do want to say that this case is old. This is like the 1880s, 90s. And it's important that we use our critical thinking skills for this because this case is so old and H H Holmes has been used in so many forms of media and kind of like a game of telephone where some sources will say one thing and another source will say another thing. There's been a lot of rumors. There's been a lot of just things that have been said that are just not true. And it's kind of hard to know exactly what is true or what has been fabricated by just people because it's an interesting story. So I also want to say that he is known as America's first serial killer, but he probably isn't actually America's first serial killer because, I doubt he's the first one, but he's the first one that's recorded or first known. And so just take that as you will. But yeah, with that, we can go on. So, H. Holmes, he was born as Herman Mudgett. I'm going to refer to him as Holmes because that's one of the many aliases that he would go by. And it'll just make this case easier to share. So, we're going to call him Holmes. So, Holmes was born into a wealthy family in New Hampshire in the United States around 1860. Now, some sources say it was like 1861, some say it was the 1860s. I don't really know his actual birthday, but he was born into an extremely wealthy family and he was a middle child of 5, which I think that's where all of his issues began. But he did have this privileged life and he was known as a mama's boy. Now, he did have a privileged life financially, but his dad was known as an alcoholic and was very abusive, which I do think kind of adds to a lot of childhood trauma. He was very smart. He spent a lot of his time reading like Edgar Allan Poe and inventing things. Edgar Allan Poe, I don't think is the reason this guy turned out to be a serial killer, but I do think he was super interested in like the dark stuff and he was just like a curious, smart kid, like inventing things. But he was very bullied, and he was bullied because he had a lazy eye. And a lot of the boys at school would mock him and just pick on him. And these boys found out that he had an extreme phobia of the doctor and like the body, like skeletons. And so a lot of these boys found out he was afraid of the skeleton. And so they decided to force him to go to the pharmacy or like the doctor's office, I guess, where there was this skeleton. And they forced him to stare at it and I think like touch it. And he was like freaking out. He was shrieking. He was so scared. And that's when his entire fear changed. It kind of turned into this like obsession. He would later go on to say that what was a fear was now a new obsession, and it kind of got him into like the medical side. But I find that very interesting because I do find like for a lot of people, like sometimes your fears, they control you so much that you do become obsessed. But he got heavily into medicine. So a few rumors about him as a child is that some sources said that he would like trap or steal pets or animals and then do surgeries on them or dissect them. But a lot of people don't know if he actually did that or if people just kind of wanted to give him like this very stereotypical persona of a serial killer. But I mean, I wouldn't put it past him to do that. And another story about him was when he was a kid, him and his friend Tom were out in the wild and they came across like an abandoned house. And so they decided to go into this home and they climbed up, and Tom had apparently went to the ledge and he had fallen to his death. Some people wonder if he didn't actually fall or if Holmes pushed him down. Some people think that maybe he didn't, but after finding out all these crazy murders that he would go on to do, that they kind of like made this into a rumor. So we'll never really know if that actually happened, but I just thought that was like interesting to kind of know. So Holmes, when he was around 16 years old, he graduated high school and he immediately took on teaching jobs. He was becoming a tutor because he was very smart and all of them wanted him to teach kids. So he did that, but it was kind of like something he just did on the side. Like he didn't really need the money. Like he came from a very wealthy family. When he was 17, his parents were farmers. And so he was working on a farm with his dad. And that's when he came across this girl named Clara, and he fell so hard for Clara. The problem with Clara was she was already in a relationship, but she was dating a guy that was just not that nice to her, and Holmes did not like that. One day, Holmes saw this man being an asshole to Clara, and he got in front of her, and he was like, don't talk to her like that, and he started defending her, and Clara immediately fell for him. I think she never had that before, so she was just like, oh my god, this man's treating me nicely, like, I need this guy, and they would fall for each other and actually get together, and they like eloped together at like 17. Now, one thing to know is Clara did say that she was so madly in love with him, but she didn't like that he was very into sex. Like he was very into sex. So I don't know if he was like just like a very sexually active man, or if it was just like at the time era she wasn't used to that. Like, cause like obviously at the time like women couldn't have sex until they were married. So I don't really know, but she did note that that was one of the things she didn't like, is how horny he was, basically. So they actually got married in 1878, and by 1880, they had their very first son, Robert. So at this point, Holmes was very bored of teaching. So Clara kind of encouraged him to go to school. He went to the University of Vermont in a medicine program, but he got kind of bored of it after a year. So he transferred schools and he went to the University of Michigan in the Department of Medicine and Surgery. It was noted that he was very, very smart. He was almost so smart that he was kind of like erratic. Like a lot of people thought he was a little weird. And he would kind of be gone for like periods of time, like for a long time. And people thought that was kind of weird. He began working as an apprentice for a professor. And this professor wasn't just like some random professor, he was the chief of anatomy. That meant Holmes would be working very, very close with dead bodies, people who had donated their bodies to like the school or to science. So he would get very close with these bodies and he would actually steal these bodies and just take them home, which I think is very crazy. And I really don't know how he got away with that. Did people, was that like a normal thing? Or did he like try and hide it? And apparently there was like a rumor that this professor and Holmes were known for like stealing bodies, which that's a crazy rumor. Oh my God, like I can't imagine being in school and seeing that and being like, that guy steals bodies. So he didn't just steal these bodies because he was like, oh, I'm really into the human body or I want to dissect these bodies. What he would do is he would dissect them and then mutilate these bodies to the point where their faces were kind of unrecognizable because he would create these like fake people out of them. Like a fake person being like, oh, this is Bradley. And then he would get like a fake life insurance policy on them. And then he would like collect their life insurance and be like, oh yeah, this is Brad. And because at the time you would have to identify people kind of just based on what they look like and like their measurements, he would just be like, yeah, that's them. And they couldn't tell because they didn't look like anyone because their faces were all mutilated. And this was one of like his really well-known things, is just collecting life insurance policies off dead people or anyone. And it would become a major pattern for Holmes where he would kind of just continue to do, and he kind of does all throughout his life. And money was a major focus for all of his crimes. So around this time, Clara had actually left Holmes with her son and they went back to New Hampshire. And some sources say she left because she felt like she missed her home life, but a lot of it stated that Holmes was very violent with Clara. So I think that she probably just felt like this was her way of getting away from Holmes and going back to her family. And like Clara came from like, I think a pretty rich family, so she wasn't in need of being with Holmes. Like she wasn't like the woman that's like she needed this man for financial reasons at the time. But yeah, so she left, but they were still together. And he would actually like send her money whenever he could. And then he kind of would like disappear on her for like 10 years. And they would never get a divorce, but they would try to get a divorce. But I'll kind of touch on that in a little bit. So he's technically still married to Clara, which is important to remember. So once the rumors were kind of getting around that Holmes was stealing these bodies, he bounced. He left to go to New York. And this is where he'd go by many aliases throughout his entire life. So victims of his like frauds and scams couldn't be like, hey, that's that guy. And so he would just go by a bunch of different aliases. And at this time, he's in New York. And apparently the police came to Holmes and they were like, hey, there was this young boy you were with and he went missing. People are wondering if you know what happened. And Holmes was just kind of like, yeah, I don't actually know what happened. Sorry. And then the police were like, oh, okay. And they just left, which I just think is so crazy at the time. Like you could just literally be like, that wasn't me. And like, they would just be like, okay, unless they had like legit proof or someone saw you, like you just got away with murder.
That's freaking wild.
Right? Also at this time, he went to Rhode Island and he checked into a hotel and he was wearing a beard and he kind of goes in this hotel, checks in, puts his stuff away, leaves the hotel, goes and finds a body, cuts the head off this body, buries the rest of the body, puts the head in like, I don't know, a box or like a bag, shaves his beard, goes into the hotel, asks for himself. And the hotel staff were like, oh, yeah, Holmes just left. He's probably somewhere else. And he was like, oh, okay. And like goes back into his hotel room. They don't know this is him. He takes his head, he puts it into the fireplace, chars it up, and gets a life insurance policy. And he tries to identify this head as him. and he tries to get a life insurance policy to be like, oh my god, this is Holmes. Holmes is dead. But it didn't really work. But a lot of his like scams and like his insurance fraud they would work, and he would just make a lot of his money through that, which I think is so crazy. Like, must have been a really good beard for them to not notice. But I mean, again, who's like that's, I don't know, it's just so weird.
It kind of reminds me of like, you've seen Aladdin, right?
Yeah.
It's like when he's like Aladdin and then he comes in as Prince Ali. Like it's just him, but he's just wearing different clothes.
Yeah, I know. It like makes me think of like Superman without his glasses on. And it's like, oh my god, who is that? But it's just like maybe people just were not paying attention, or you're just like a staff member and you're like, yeah, I don't know. Holmes was here, he's gone. He eventually leaves New York, and because a lot of the like after like them accusing him of that crime of the boy, he just leaves, and which kind of screams guilty to me. So he goes from New York to Philadelphia, and he'd kind of go throughout the states doing teaching jobs and being a principal. And then when he's in Philadelphia, he works in a drugstore. Now during this time, he's doing a lot of petty fraud. He's swindling a lot of insurance companies. And then while working at this drugstore, he gets accused of poisoning a young boy. This young boy had apparently purchased some medication and got sick. And when the police ask him, he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I have no involvement. So after he's like, I didn't get that boy sick, he just leaves, which again screams guilty to me. So that's when he goes to Chicago. And this is around 1886. And this is kind of like where his murder castle would begin. So at this time, he is going by Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. He would kind of go by H H Holmes, but he would change like the initials. And, you know, he could be like Henry Harry Holmes or something like that. So if people were like, that's the guy who did it, he'd be like, no, wrong guy. Like just another way to like scam people. Some people speculate that he went by Holmes for Sherlock Holmes, although I don't know if that's actually true or if that was just people speculating because it's like Sherlock Holmes. I don't know. So while he's in Chicago, he gets married to a woman named Myrta, and he goes on to have 3 kids with her. He's still legally married to Clara, and he would actually get married to another woman while being married to 2 other women that didn't know he was not married. Like, this is so crazy. Like, this guy does everything but take accountability. That was another one of his patterns too, just like finding women, getting married to them. So while in Chicago, he works at this pharmacy. He meets this couple named Elizabeth Holton, and like they own this pharmacy. Now, one of the major rumors was that this pharmacy was owned by this older couple, and then they randomly mysteriously disappeared, and then he owned the pharmacy. But that's actually not true. What happened was he got hired on, and then they really liked him and they became good friends, and then he offered to pay for the pharmacy. They were like, yeah, we'll take it. And they would go on to have like a pretty good connection, and like they were friendly with each other. I don't know if they were friends, but they actually really liked Holmes. And so Holmes owns this pharmacy now, and he kind of notices this little plot of land that's like just on the corner near his pharmacy, and he thinks, this would be a really cool place to have a murder castle. So he pulls out his little pens and his tools, and he starts to write up and draw like a blueprint to this murder castle. But he didn't want anyone to know what this murder castle was going to be for. He was going to use it to lure people, and then he would just kill them and then use their bodies for life insurance scams, or selling their bodies to like medical schools for like a cheaper price so he could make money. He basically is like, I gotta keep this under wraps. So he would actually hire contractors and have them work on specific rooms, and then, or like sections of this place, and then he would fire them before they were finished so he didn't have to pay them, and also so they wouldn't know what they were, like what he was doing, because he'd have like trap doors and all this. He's like, I can't let them know, because obviously these contractors would be like, what the hell are you doing? Like, this is kind of crazy. So a lot of them would get pissed at him because they'd be like, dude, I just worked for free and you're not going to pay me. And he'd be like, I don't care. This place was so crazy. So it was 3 stories. It started off with 2 stories. It wasn't advertised as a hotel. It was more kind of just like this place he had. And then later, when there would be this fair trade show convention center, he would kind of be like, hey, like I have a hotel, come stay with me. And then people would mysteriously disappear. So let me kind of explain the layout of this place, and I'll try to explain it as best as I can, but if you're watching this on YouTube, we will have a graphic up. but it basically was this massive building. It was like 150 feet long, 50 feet wide, massive as hell. 3 stories with a basement. The first floor was kind of like this shopping center. It had a barber shop, it had a pharmacy, it had a jewelry center, and he would then add living quarters onto the second floor where these were like just kind of like normal ass rooms. And then the third floor was kind of more so like the hotel area that he would add on eventually. It was equipped with a bunch of normal rooms and normal hotel room, but then there would be like trap doors and secret passages. All rooms were soundproof, doors that could be locked from the outside, stairs that would go nowhere, that would kind of just turn you around and kind of like lead you in a circle. It was a giant maze with over 100 rooms. These rooms would be airtight with gas jets in the vents where people would choke and die on gas. He apparently made a machine that would pump gas through the pipes to the rooms. There would be like doors that would open like a chute that would drop you into another room or into the basement. And sometimes these rooms would have just like a box essentially, like no windows, no doors, and no way out. There was hidden doors, doors that open to nothing, fake doors, no doors, dead ends. And this was kind of a way to make people feel scared and panic and kind of trap them like an animal, because obviously when you panic and you get scared, you're going to make rash decisions or you're just going to freak out. And I think he liked it. It was a game. There also was like a vault room, kind of like Fallout, where like you have a giant vault and you could open it from the outside, but you couldn't open it from the inside. He also had these like little like closet spaces in between the walls and the floors, and no one knows what he really put in there. Some think he put in like weapons or keys or even bodies if they could fit in there. There was also a room that had iron plates all around it with blow torches. So when these torches were lit up, they would heat the room like an oven. There were these like medieval like torture rooms, kind of like your stereotypical medieval torture devices. And what he would do is sometimes he would like drug people with chloroform, or he would use like airless vaults that would kind of like just knock someone out. And then he would tie you down and he would do this creepy thing where he would put like your wrists and your ankles all on different tables, and then he would like move the tables, stretching you, and like, ugh, that's so creepy. And there was a hanging room, which is ugh. And then typically what would happen is you could just be in a room and it would look like a normal room. Like you would just be like, oh, it's a normal hotel room. And then you could be gassed and there was like acid, or maybe you were drugged and the door is locked, and then he would leave you there to either till you starve to death, or he would just take you down to the basement and perform surgeries on you.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he would beat people to death. He would starve you and, like I said, chloroform you, strangle you, kind of old-fashioned murders. He had like bell devices on doors, so if you opened a door, he would hear it from like his office and be like, okay, someone's in the trap, gonna go down there and go kill them. And then he would take you to the basement, which was the worst part. The basement was very insane. No one could just get into the basement except for Holmes. You had to go through a secret passage in the bathroom. So basically you couldn't just go into the basement and randomly end up there. Like he had it down to an art, honestly. There would be, in this basement, there would be like torture devices, there would be barrels and pits of acid, there would be dissection tables, a place to hang bodies, and there would be a kiln where he would burn bodies or maybe dispose like evidence. He had pits of acid that he would put bodies in. And so what he would do is he would get the body and he would skin them, and then he would take all of the meat and all the tendons and all of that stuff into the acid, get it all off, clean the bones, and then sell these bones to a medical school or doctors for a cheaper price.
Wait, so some people were alive?
Yeah. So some people could be alive, like he would torture you, sometimes alive, and then other times it was like he would just drug you up and then do this and then kill you, or you would already be killed and then he would basically put you in acid and get all that meat off you and you're dead and now you're just bones. And so what he would do is he would sell these bones to medical schools or doctors for a cheaper price. Obviously, they most likely assumed that he probably was just like I think it's called a grave robber. I don't know if that's the word, but like we're
That is the word. Yeah.
yeah, like they would think like he would like steal bones and they would be like, oh, well, we're getting this for a cheaper price. I doubt any of them thought he was a serial killer because I mean, most people are not thinking like that. And so that's what he would do. And then some of them he would just mutilate them and then do insurance scams and no one knew. A lot of his victims were women because he was apparently very charming and women fell for him despite him being like 5'4". And so apparently he was very charming. Women fell for him, or he would lure women also with like job opportunities. And it wasn't just women, like also people. Most guests just didn't make it out alive. Some people did. Like some people could probably go in and like leave. He probably didn't want to make it too obvious, but most people didn't know what was happening. And his castle, his murder hotel, was completed by the time there was this World Fair Trade Center where over like 27 million people were. And so people would be like, oh my God, I need a place to stay for the night. And he'd be like, oh, come to my place. I have a hotel. And then he would kill you. So no one knows exactly how many people died there. There's a long list of people who went to this hotel, around 50 of them, and they never returned. So it's really hard to know. He would kill, it's estimated, around 27 to 200 people, which I know is a huge jump. So it's kind of hard to know exactly, but I kind of will touch on that in a little bit. I kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the murder victims that we do know about. So one of the very first ones we do know is a woman named Julia and her daughter Pearl Smith. And this is in like December of 1892. So Julia was a 31-year-old wife of a doctor and a mother. She began working in the jewelry center where she began to get a little close with Holmes, where they would have an affair. Her husband obviously found this out and he was like pissed. He was like, can't believe you're having an affair on with my boss. And he's like, I'm leaving. So he leaves Julia and their 5-year-old daughter behind, and Julia ends up getting custody of Pearl and she continues living in the hotel, and she actually gets pregnant with Holmes, and Holmes would give Julia an abortion. And even though he had medical experience, he did not have experience with abortions, and then Julia was killed through the abortion.
Oh my
Because of
God.
this, he hid Pearl from the murder. Like, he didn't want her to know, so he drugged her and killed her. Now, it's hard to know if that's exactly what happened because he also was a massive liar. He first claimed that she went to visit her dying mother. Then he claimed that her husband killed her. Then he later confessed that he killed her during the abortion. It's hard to know if he really just killed her and then her daughter. I don't think he had like the softness of being like, oh, I don't want Pearl to know what it's like not having a mother. I'm gonna just like kill her. I feel like he's just like kind of lying. I do think that she did die though from the abortion. And then 2 weeks after her disappearing, he was already renting out her room and she still had like her stuff in it. So like that's suspicious. And so another person was a woman named Emmeline Seagrand. She was 23 years old. She was working with Holmes for around 6 months. She was a secretary and she worked with a doctor who would work with Holmes to create this vaccine that was supposed to cure alcoholism, which obviously, no, was like poisoning people. But prior to a few weeks before she disappeared, Emmeline had actually kind of showed disinterest in Holmes and didn't want to continue their relationship, and then she was never seen again. Her parents were informed that she went off to marry a man named Robert, which I think was most likely a cover-up done by him. And then her empty luggage trunk was sent back to her mom in Indiana. Later, the police would actually find her skeleton at the home of a doctor in Chicago. His name was M.G. Chappell, and he actually would buy a lot of the skeletons off Holmes and like fix them up and then send them to schools. He had no idea that Holmes was obviously a serial killer, but that's how they found Emmeline's bones. Some of the police speculate that she also got pregnant with Holmes and had an abortion and died through that, but it's kind of hard to know. So then there were these two sisters named Minnie and Nanny Williams. So Minnie was a 24-year-old woman who was an actress, and she was like a one-time actress, and she was in Chicago. He was going under this pseudonym, like this alias of Harry Gordon, and he actually offered her a job to be his personal typewriter. And at the time, they kind of start getting close and they develop a relationship, and he persuades her to transfer her property that was in Texas to a man named Alexander Bond, who was Holmes, by the way. And she kind of is like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll do this. And she transfers this deed to Holmes, but she doesn't know it's Holmes. And later, he transferred this to a man named Ben Peitzel, which we'll talk about later. He comes back into this case. In the following months, Minnie and Holmes would develop, like, they would kind of get married. I don't think they were ever legally married, but they were living in their own apartment. Holmes set up this plan to have Nanny, who was Minnie's younger sister, come and visit Minnie. And it needed to be a surprise. So he tells Nanny, like, why don't you come here and like surprise your sister? It'd be so fun. And so Nanny is so excited. And she actually tells her aunt in writing to not look for her, that she was with Harry Holmes, who was going to take care of Nanny and Minnie and to never worry about them. I don't know if Nanny ever actually wrote this or if it was Holmes writing this or if he bullshitted Nanny. Nanny comes to visit and Holmes picks her up and he's like, we're not going to tell Minnie. And he brings her to the hotel and he brings her into a room, which was one of the vaults that had the door on it. I don't know if she didn't know it didn't have a vault, because I mean, I would find that suspicious. So it's hard to know. A lot of theories speculate that with the vault rooms, that he'd kind of lure people in, like being like, oh, come check this out. And then he just locks you in. So no one knows exactly how Nanny died, but she was either gassed or there was acid in her room, because they actually found her foot skin on the door later. So that's very disturbing. And
Hold up. What? Her foot skin?
yeah, like the skin of her foot.
That's freaking wild.
Yeah. Minnie had no idea this was happening because, again, the rooms were soundproof and she was only like a few rooms down from her sister. She had no idea her sister was there. And Minnie would also die, but no one actually knows how Minnie died. They speculate that she was probably gassed. Gassing people was pretty much the main way he'd kill people because it was the easiest way. It was mostly clean in that way because he'd have these like things that he'd pump gas into it and then they just pass out. There was also some speculated murders. So there was a man who was 68 years old and he died of a stroke while working in the drugstore in the hotel. And witness stated that they saw Holmes pouring black liquid down his throat, but I don't know if that's just like a story being told or if that actually did happen. There also was a woman that he testified, her name was Emily, who disappeared while working in the drugstore, and he did confess to her murder. There was plenty of people that he admitted to a lot of confessions. There was like 9 people he confessed to. There was a lot of people that were in the hotel and they went missing. Another possible victim that could have been one was, her name was Lucy, and her bank book was found with human hair in the chimney of the hotel, which that's scary.
Was it her hair?
I think so. I don't think they know exactly, but they speculate that it was her hair. But it was her bank book. There was also 2 other people that they speculate. They were unknown and they found this man and this woman, their bodies, in 1919. So this was 23 years later after Holmes was executed. They were found on a farm that I believe Holmes had a property at. So that one, they don't know for sure. There's so many murders where there are ones that he actually confessed to, and then a lot of murders that he was like, he never confessed to, but they're like speculated because they just like randomly disappeared. So he eventually leaves Chicago because insurance companies are coming after him for like arson, and he's like, oh fuck, I gotta get out of here. So he actually goes to Texas where he had that property from Minnie. He was actually going to use this place to be a better and bigger murder hotel, but it never really went through because he was actually arrested. And you would think, oh, he was arrested for murders. No, he was arrested for stealing horses, which I'm like, oh my God, okay. And like mortgage goods and all that. So he goes to jail for a short amount of time and he gets let out on bail. But while he's in prison, he talks to this man named Hedgepeth. And Hedgepeth was already in jail serving a 25-year life sentence. So he starts talking to Hedgepeth and he's like, I have a brilliant idea. I'm going to take an insurance policy out on myself for $10,000. I'm going to fake my death. And if you can get me a really sketchy lawyer who can help me do this, I'll give you $500. Hedgepath was like, yeah, I know a guy. And so he gives him this attorney. This attorney's like, this is such a brilliant, brilliant idea. The plan didn't really work out because a lot of the insurance companies were now kind of catching on that he was doing a lot of these frauds. They were like, this is kind of suspicious. So they refused to pay out this policy. And so Holmes was like, fuck, I got to come up with another idea. That's when he comes up to do the same idea, but with Ben Peitzel, who was a friend of his and kind of like an associate of his. They were friends, but I wouldn't consider them like best friends. Attorneys described Peitzel as a tool or the creature of Holmes, which I think is a very creepy wording.
The creature or tool?
Yeah, a tool or the creature, which I just think is so creepy. Like, I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know about their relationship. I think that Holmes was, because he was very smart, Peitzel was known as being more, I think he was more attractive, so he was able to kind of lure people. Now, Peitzel didn't know any of the murders. He didn't know about any of that stuff, but he did know a lot about like insurance crimes and all that. So Holmes and Peitzel begin to talk, and they're like, you know what? Why don't we do the same thing and we fake your death? We'll take a $10,000 life insurance out. And Peitzel agreed to it, but he was like, okay, only if my wife gets majority of the money and my family, and then you guys can split it up with the lawyer and you. And so they're like, okay, so this is a brilliant idea. So Ben was going to put on this persona of a man named B.F. Perry. And he was going to be this inventor who would have a lab explosion, killing him and kind of making him unrecognizable. They were going to need to find a body that had the same measurements as Ben, because that's typically how they would identify bodies at the time. So the plan was Ben was going to go into hiding, Holmes was going to look for a body and stage this whole thing, mutilate this body, and then Ben's family would have to go and identify this body as Ben. Now, his family did know about it, so they weren't like being like, ooh, like who is this? Like they were a part of it. So they have this plan in motion, they get everything ready, but Ben starts having cold feet. He's kind of like, I don't know, this is kind of weird. I don't think I want to do this. And he felt like it was just too much to put his family through. He's like, I don't know. And Holmes is like, no, no, no. Why don't you like come over? We'll talk it out. Maybe you just need to kind of like talk through it so we can kind of understand. When Ben visits Holmes, he's kind of talking through it, but Holmes kind of notices that Ben's like, not gonna work out. He's like, I'm not gonna do it. Holmes is like, nope, this is not gonna happen. So he gets Ben like shit faced drunk, like so drunk. And then he proceeds to chloroform Ben, and then he sets him on fire, which then allowed Holmes to collect the life insurance policy. So Ben's family, they go and identify this body as Ben. They don't think it's Ben, but it actually is Ben, and they have no idea. Holmes has to kind of keep up this like facade. So he tells Carrie, who is Ben's wife, Ben is hiding in London, Ontario, not to be confused with London in the UK, and that they would all be paid off if they were, once they were all in London, and that Ben was waiting for his family. But he was like, I really want to keep this money for myself, so I'm going to have to get rid of the entire Peitzel family. So he has to come up with an idea of how to do this. And he also became worried that Ben's children, he had 5 of them, he was afraid that the older ones were going to alert the authorities. So he's like, how am I going to get rid of them? So he convinces Carrie that she needs to go with him to London, but that they couldn't travel all together, that they needed to split up into 2 groups, and they needed to not go directly to London. They needed to travel in like a zigzag, like just to not lead a trail. So he's like, I'll take your 3 kids and you take your 2 other kids, and I will guide you guys to London. And they're like, okay, this is the best way to do it. So he takes Alice, Nellie, and Howard, who were all under the age of 13. Carrie takes the 2 other kids. And so what he would do is he had a lot of different properties. So he would take the 3 kids, take them to one house, leave them there, go and grab Carrie, and take the other kids and put them to another house. And they would kind of do this throughout the United States. It's not entirely sure how long this was kind of set in motion, but he was like, oh, I'm going to have to get rid of these kids. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to have to kill them. He would go to Howard, who was just 7 at the time, and he would give him a bunch of medication, which would cause him to overdose and die. And once he was dead, he actually cut his body up and put him on the stove, later the police would find Howard's teeth in the stove, and then he would go and take the two girls, Nellie and Alice, to London. I don't know what he told them, if he was like, "Oh, like Howard's with your mom." I'm not too sure. Once they're in London, he actually takes the two girls. He forces them into like a trunk or like a box, and he drills a hole, and he basically puts a hose into the box and he gases them. Once they're dead, he would take their naked bodies to a property that he owned and bury them in the floor. Some people speculate that he did SA them since they were naked, and a lot of his crimes were not noted to be naked, a lot of his victims. So people don't know if he did. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. Carrie doesn't know that her husband is dead and her three kids are dead, and she is still traveling with Holmes to get to Canada. Holmes still hasn't paid anyone, so Hedgepeth is kind of getting pretty annoyed. He's still waiting for his payment, and he's just like, Holmes is not a trustworthy guy. I bet you he took this money for himself. So he goes and he alerts the police about the entire insurance scam. He tells them how he was going to fake his death, and then it didn't work, and that he went and faked Ben's death, and then he actually killed Ben. And so the police were like, "Oh my god, we got to go find Holmes." But Holmes was very smart. He was already one step ahead. So they had to go and try and track down Holmes or Carrie. Once they were actually able to find Carrie, they found her, I believe, in Boston. They had to inform her that her husband that she identified, like that body was actually her husband and it wasn't a scam. And now Carrie is like freaking out because she's like, he has my three kids. I don't know where my three kids are. I can't imagine that fear. And so she kind of tells the police, like, we're supposed to meet up in London, or here's where he's supposed to be. I think he was only a few blocks actually away from Carrie. The police actually are able to track down Holmes, and they find him in Boston, who had no idea about any of this, by the way. She had no idea at all. And when the police find Holmes, they can't find the Peitzel children. And he was kind of like, I don't know where they are, like, sorry. And the police are like, we know what you did. They're gonna arrest him for Ben's murder. And then they would go and search all of his properties, and that's where they would actually find the children and their bodies. Holmes eventually admits to fraud, but he denies all of the murder. He's like, I didn't kill anyone. I was swindling a lot of companies, but I was not killing anyone. But the police were like, we literally know you killed people. We have proof. We went to your properties. We went to all this. And then they actually went to his murder castle, which actually caught on fire by like an unknown person right when Holmes was arrested. So no one really, I don't know if he set that up or if that's just like a coincidence. Kind of sussy. When they go to the murder castle, that's where they find all of this, like these traps, the bones of Little Pearl. They find her toys. They find human teeth, hair, buckets of acid, and they find even like scratch marks in the wall, which really does show that people were trapped in these rooms. And when they go to the basement, that's where they find all of like the crazy stuff. They go back to Holmes and they're like, we literally have proof you did this. Holmes gets really, really annoying, and he would confess to 27 murders. Then he would later confess to 130. Then he'd be like, oh, I didn't actually commit any murders. And then he'd be like, oh, I did 12. And then he would kind of go back and forth. And the police were like, oh my God, you are annoying. Like, just admit to one of them. So he finally would admit to some murders, but then he would also admit to murders of people that were still alive. And the police are like, what are you doing? Apparently, a newspaper actually caught wind of this, and they actually offered Holmes a bunch of money if he could admit to a bunch of murders, and then they would also get this major story in their newspaper and he would get money. And so he would eventually confess to 130, but a lot of people speculate that it was around 200, but it's kind of hard to know. I really do think he did, but it's hard to kind of know. When he finally confessed, he would say, I was born with a devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. Which, like, Okay. He was sentenced to death and he was executed by hanging on May 7th, 1896 in Philadelphia. He was noted that he was very calm and it was very weird. Like people said that he was like way too calm. Like he was about to be killed. He didn't look anxious or scared or sad or annoyed. Like he was just like calm. He had one last wish, and it was that he wanted to be buried 10 feet deep and he wanted his casket to be cemented in because he didn't want people to dig him up and mess with his bones, which I think is very ironic considering all of his crimes.
Literally so ironic.
One of the creepiest things is when he was hung, his neck didn't snap. So he was just hanging there, kind of choking and twitching, but he was also a little calm. And it took him around 15 to 20 minutes to actually die. His castle that caught on fire remained standing actually for a long time until 1938. It's now a US postal office. I'm very curious to know if like this place is very like rampant with tourists because I can imagine that'd be really annoying trying to go to the post office and he's got all these tourists there. But Holmes' story and this case has been used as a muse in so many different ways, in so many different forms of media. It's kind of hard to know what has been true or distorted. There was actually a lot of rumors that he was Jack the Ripper or that he worked with Jack the Ripper, but they actually just found Jack the Ripper's identity, who is a Polish immigrant named Aaron Kosominski. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Obviously, he's not Jack the Ripper. There's also a lot of media that have him in it. So there's like a video game called The Devil in Me, which I haven't played, but I've seen gameplay of it, which has a lot of references to his castle and himself. There's also his hotel that was in an episode of Supernatural. And there's also supposed to be a miniseries that Fox picked up called Devil in the White City, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, but it hasn't really had the script written or anything, so it's hard to know if that's even happening. But yeah, some of the rumors have been debunked. Some people think that there was not that many deaths in the hotel and that it's just been kind of become this like American ghost story. They were able to confirm 9 deaths. And again, he did confess to 130, but a lot of historians believe it was 200. Yeah, that's the case of H Holmes and the murder castle. I'm curious to know what everyone's thoughts are. If you think that he did commit a lot of these murders, or do you think it's been kind of like exaggerated? I'm curious, but thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys in our next episode.